Hello, Josh, Cullen Cosplay. This will be part 2 of the Deathstroke helmet. Definitely want to focus on what we're doing with the templates. The templates that you do print out, I use regular paper, so it's not cardstock. You don't have to harden it, you don't have to make a form out of it, so it is just regular paper, so you'll save a lot of money on that. Those alignment marks that we talked about, those will come into play for when you connect your pieces. So for the very large pieces that do overlap from page to page, this is what you'll get. And of course, there's my ruler mark, and that's the overlap that I connected with tape. I just use a regular pair of scissors on it. I don't do the X-Acto knife. It didn't have to be perfect to me. It just, as long as I'm following the lines, I've kind of learned since a long time ago, maybe kindergarten, to go ahead and work with that. I use a pair of hairdressing scissors to go with it. But anyways, that's how your template should come out once you get the alignment marks. The good thing about it is with these types of templates, you can actually fold them over and see if they're going to be symmetrical or not, so you know if one side's going to be off anyways. And you can also trim it, so that way you can actually see what it looks like before you place it on film. The other thing is, I mentioned the circles. What I didn't mention was, when you do cut these out, you want to draw your circle on the inside of whatever the pattern is. If you draw the outside, so say from point to point, if you go from the outside of it, it's going to make this piece longer to go around. So you want to draw it on the inside. That way this piece, it's easier to trim than to try to add foam if you're short on something. So always draw on the inside of whatever you're focusing on to make it round. But I forgot to leave that out on the last one. There it is. So make sure, like I said, this had a bunch of edges and corners. It doesn't now. I put the circle on the inside of it. The finished piece, all I do is lay this stuff on foam. So, speaking of finished piece, then I cut them straight out. So I use a black marker, throw it on the foam, trace everything out. When I cut it out, everything's straight. I don't think about the angles. I use a rotary tool for that. So that comes during the assembly phase. For just the straight cutting, everything is just straight lines. I'm more worried about how the shapes come out, if everything's correct. Trying to use up as much foam as I can by laying them correctly on the templates. Some of the stuff I do recommend for pieces like this, when you're worried about having the edges, of course when you're moving from one side to the other, you'll get off just a little bit. So needless to say, I do a glue stick. I stole one of my kids' glue sticks. Glue stick the back of it, lay it on the pattern, or lay it on the foam, trace the pattern out, and just pull it up. And the residue, at least on my stuff, comes right off, so you can just sit there and rub it off if you need to. But if you do it super light, you won't see anything after you pull it up. But like I said, just cut it out. I use a regular EO cutting knife. It has the breakable blades on it. Harbor Freight is pretty much like my second home. Them and Joann's for stuff, unfortunately. But I think it's $1.50 for a pack of 8 of these, and of course 8 blades come on each one. Usually when it comes to helmets, I do about 2 to 3 blades because I want the sharpest blades whenever I cut. So before I even start, I bust a blade. I don't care if I remembered if it's brand new or not. I always have a fresh blade before I even put it into the foam. Just follow all your lines. Some of the things that I do recommend, I didn't realize how long the process was until I started talking about it and how I actually do stuff. But when it comes to pieces like this, which will be your final template, all these little corners is where I usually start. So I have the freshest blade, and it doesn't matter where it's laying on the mat. I'll hit all the corners first, all the sharp edges, all the sharp points, the tiny stuff that you'll see on there. There's a spot around the eye that's really small. I cut that one out first because I wanted to make sure it was really exact. The blade was really fresh when I did it. So I hit all those edges, and then I go back and do all the straight lines, because you can fly through this stuff really quick. But when it comes to these corners, I actually go around the black just a little bit. I give it more width, and that's why I scored one of the samples of it. And you'll see that there's still spacing. Hopefully you can see. There's still spacing for the whiteness, because it's easier to have a fat tip coming together, and it still keeps the shape. It still looks good when it comes together. And especially when you glue, if it's fresh, it's a clean cut, you don't have to worry about the pulls. I did have one where I did it wrong, right there, and you can see the fatness of it, which I'll have to trim when I put it together. But that's the stuff you don't want to do. You always want to cut in to your edges, into your corners. If you pull the other way, it's going to pull the foam. You can have a really sharp blade, but like I said, I usually break off 2 of those blades. I don't try to use 15 X-Acto knives on one mat of foam or anything, but just try to go towards your points. So all these corners, I went towards the corners for all those. It makes it a lot easier on it. You don't get the pulls, you don't get the offset, because when you start cutting into it, you can do a couple test samples to see what I'm talking about, but literally try to do those corners and you'll see that it pulls a little bit on it. After I get the pieces cut out, the next stage I move on to is all those awesome undercuts. And of course, on the first video, with all the lines that you saw on here, these either mean you're going to have something laying on top of it, or you're going to be folding it for the shape. One of my rituals is actually leaving whatever file I'm working on, so Deathstroke helmet, I literally have that on my desktop right now, and I leave it up there throughout the entire build. So even though I haven't touched it all week, it's still been on there all week, because I don't take it down until I'm finished with the project. So I'm always looking at the model, always referring back to it. But when you're doing the undercuts, that's the biggest portion, because just for example on this piece is one that's going to go underneath. So these sides are going to fold up, but you have these thickness parts right here, and when you're doing paper, you just have a tendency to look at those and go, oh, I need to do something with that. Well, on the program, when you actually look at the 3D model, you can see that something's going to lay on top of it. So the only thing you need to cut is for those undercuts to actually make it is what you see on the model. So out of that entire piece, with all the stuff that you see on there, literally it's just these. And that's because this is going to come up, and that's going to come up. Of course, to do that, the first thing I do, get your piece. Anything that you do see that you have are going to have undercuts, save those pieces. I usually save all my pieces until I'm completely done with the build, so I have templates everywhere. But your piece that you have, unfortunately it's going to be backwards because of how we stenciled it. So what you do, literally my mouse pad is riddled with puncture spots, but I just take a regular pen and I'll punch out the spots that's supposed to have the undercuts. So all this stuff up here doesn't need any undercuts, even though it's showing it. All that is going to be something laying on top of it. That's his right eye. So needless to say, he's going to have that patch on top of his eye. So the only thing that needs undercuts are these and the front. So I punch all the holes first. That way, when I take my foam, that back's blank, and then I automatically have a stencil. And what I do is I go back through, hit it again with the pen, and then I'll draw on it. When you have your lines all traced out, what I do is all you got to do is go on the outside of whatever line at a V. And then you hit the other side of it. And you're not on the line, you're actually on the outside on the edge, which I can show you. And then you go on the other side as a V. And then what should happen, if you cut it right, you should just be able to pull it up. Right there, all of a sudden you're going to have a fold after you glue. Hills and valleys, if you don't know anything about Pepifera, that's the biggest part, is the fact that you know that it's going to do this throughout the build. So on the earpiece, it's going to fold up. So I got a valley right there, so I did my angles. The other piece, I actually have to do just a straight cut because it's going to fold up. So this is going to come up instead of go down. So your final piece, when it actually gets in the helmet, is going to look like that. Boop, and just wrap around. So just make sure those are the two ways, and you'll see it'll be a dash, a dot, and dash whenever you need to have it go the other way. When you need a valley, it's literally dash, 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 dash. But what you need to do is look at the model. Make sure you look at that piece and you know how that piece is supposed to look. Literally click on it, lights up completely red, and you see how the shape is. So always refer to that model and always keep your eye on it. But as soon as I get done with all that, so all your templates are cut. Of course, I still have to cut my undercuts on this one. But after you get all your undercuts done, I wait to start gluing things for the assembly part because I want the model right in front of me. So all the undercuts, stuff like this, sometimes you know how it's supposed to look if it's supposed to be 90-degree angle. You don't have to make the cuts as deep on certain stuff if it's just supposed to be a little bit round, which refer to the model. But the next step is literally where you start gluing stuff together, or at least that's the step for me. You could, of course, if you want to skip ahead and just glue stuff together and then assemble the pieces all at the same time, it's completely your call. This is just like it's how I do stuff. I like just taking it in steps, and it's just a pattern that goes with my flow. Whatever works for you, you need to roll with it. So everybody that gives you that information, find something that's comfortable for you, run with it, and feel free to modify it. If you don't like how some of this stuff is turning out, change it. You know, if you don't want it to be a certain way, or just you have freedom to modify the templates, which is why I like, you know, I think you see all over the RPF, they say use these things as a guide because that's what it's there for. Be creative, see what you want to see, do what you want to do, and hopefully this is helping. So I'll start going and actually building the helmet, and hopefully I'll get this thing done this weekend so we can get it out to them. So thank you for watching again, and I will talk to you later.